Okay, so the lecture slides for today's session has been uploaded in the Beachboard, so you can also download them or you can refer to those slides. So I am uh, going to share the screen. So is it visible to everybody, the PowerPoint slides?
Yeah.
Yeah. So today what we will be going to cover is a new concept, and it is about fatigue and how fatigue loads come uh, into play in actual practice, in actual loading scenario, in actual real life loading environments, and how they cause the material or any structural component to fail. And as a designers, what we can do to design a specific components which can withstand fatigue loading or which can withstand the fatigue stresses. So today we will be focusing on fatigue, or when we say fatigue, it's basically means how the component is capable of withstanding cyclic loading, a cyclic pattern of loading and unloading. So that is what we will see in today's lecture. So this concept was first investigated for a specific application where a rail car axle was failing in service, even though the axle life or axle, the design of the axle was such that it can withstand sufficient load, static load. But what was being observed that even if the load that is being applied on the axle is almost half of the design load, it is still failing in service. So that at that time it was a very puzzling um, phenomena, that why a specific component is not withstanding the load for which it has been designed. So at that time, the concept of fatigue was not very much it was not very much like established. So the first investigation or documented investigation of fatigue was on a rail car axle, and that was by a German technologist from a railroad system that they have been working on. And what the specific loading scenario, as you can see here, as you can see from the mouse or the cursor that you can see in your screen, that you have this rail car axle which has this supports at the two ends. These supports are basically your wheels, and the arrows that are basically pointed downwards are the suspension points where the bogie of the rail is basically mounted. So the weight of the bogie, the rail car, was suspended through the suspensions at two different points, as you can see here. So that is basically, if you look at this simple schematic of the loading distribution on the beam or the axle, you will see that you will have the reactions at these two endpoints, and the load is coming from the suspension mountings at the middle. So this is the simple schematic for the loading phenomena, the load that actually comes in the on the railcar axle. Now, if you go on the right, you see that I have drawn the shear force diagram and the bending moment diagram. So the shear force diagram basically says that the shear force will remain constant till the first mounting point, then it drops to zero, it remains zero till the next mounting point, suspension mounting point, and then the shear force again drops to the weight, the half of the weight of the rail car. And that's how the variation of the shear force would look like for this specific representation of the loads on the axle. And if you look at the bending moment diagram, the bending moment diagram will basically starts from zero at the mounting location of the wheel, and it varies linearly. And afterwards, because of the shear force acting downwards at the suspension mounting, the bending moment becomes flat, it becomes constant. So what it basically says that the bending moment remains same between or constant between two different mounting points. So if you think more about the specific specific loading scenario, you will see that the section of the beam or the axle between these two mounting points is experiencing a uniform bending moment. And after this mounting point, the bending moment again goes down to 0. So here you will see that the bending moment rises up to a maximum value, remains constant, and then drops down to 0. And the reason I am actually showing you this two diagrams, because eventually what we are interested in, if you remember, we actually started our discussion with preventing the failure. So here, when we are trying to understand how the railcar axle is failing, the failure of the axle basically means now we have to deal with stresses. What type of stresses are coming in the material? Are the stresses are such that they are satisfying a specific failure criteria or not? So all these things that we have learned and what you are actually also working on in your homeworks, and you are obviously, I believe you are reading from your text, that how the stresses in the material can be evaluated and um, can be investigated to determine if a failure is going to happen by the application of a specific failure criteria. And so far we have learned two types of failure criteria. One is called Tresca's for ductile materials, Tresca failure criteria, and von Mises failure criteria. So let me know if whatever I am just saying so far makes sense to you. Do you guys follow what I'm saying so far?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any questions from anyone so far? What we have been discussing? So, okay, if everybody is following it so far, so what I'm going to discuss next is, if you look at the distribution of stresses in the material, what type of stresses do you think will come between the two mounting points in this axis?
Can you repeat the question, Professor? The audio cut off.
Just give me a second. So my question was that if you have to find stresses between two mounting points in the cell, what type of stresses do you think that will appear? Whether they will be normal stresses or whether they will be shear stresses. So I am only asking about whether the stresses are going to be normal stresses or whether the stresses are going to be shear stresses. What do you guys think?
Someone said shear, and I agree also with shear.
Okay. Any other response, guys? So everybody agrees that there will be shear stresses in the material?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so everybody agrees with that fact that there will be shear stresses. Now, if you look at the shear force diagram, actually, let me switch back to the document camera so that I can show you exactly what we are trying to understand here. Just give me a second, guys. So can you guys look at the document here?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we see it.
So the shear force diagram, if I actually see, it will be constant. It becomes 0 and it drops down to negative W over 2. This is W over 2. This is your shear force diagram. And the bending moment diagram, as we have seen, is it goes like this. It remains constant and then it drops down to 0. So this is your maximum bending moment. And the maximum bending moment, can anybody tell me what that should, where that will be equals to, if this is your A over 4, this is A divided by 2, and this is A divided by 4. So what would be the maximum bending moment, do you guys think that would be equals to in terms of the load and the distance? AW by 8. So it is W by 2 divided by A by multiplied by A by 4, which is WA divided by. That's correct. Now, if you look at this section between this point and this point, the shear force is 0. So if the shear force is 0, that means there is no force that is going to cause any shear stresses. If you look at the cross section here, it is a circular cross section. There is no load acting on the beam or the axle between point, let's call this point A, point B, point C, and point D. So between point B and C, there is no shear force acting on the axle. So it is as if this length of the axle is under pure bending moment. Pure bending moment means that there is a bending moment which is non-zero, equals to W times A divided by 8. That is a non-zero bending moment, but accompanied by 0 shear force. That means this cross section will not have they will not have any shear stresses, but it will have normal stresses or normal bending stresses, because in this section or in this length, there is a non-zero bending moment, and this bending moment will cause what? It will cause stresses in the material. So if I have number 1 and number 2, let's say P1 and P2, let me actually zoom this cross section a bit more. So let's say this is my cross section of the axle. This is my point P1 and this is my point P2. I know that I will have normal stresses at point P1, and that will be tensile or compressive. What do you guys think? Volunteer? Yeah. Compression P1, tension T2. So is that only one is going to give response and everybody else is just decided not to give me any response or any feedback? Yeah, that is correct. Then I will only ask to end that, okay, what do you feel like, what should be the stresses are, what should be the variation of stresses on the material? Okay, so everybody agrees that we have negative or compressive stresses on the top at point P1 and tensile stresses.
Yes.
And these are normal bending stress. Everybody agrees with that. So normal bending stresses, and we know how to calculate them. So normal bending stresses are calculated by M times this, if this is your radius R, so M times R divided by moment of inertia. So R is your radius, and for circular cross section, the moment of inertia is pi d4 by 64, which is pi r4 by 4. Okay, so it will becomes 4m by pi r cube. So is everybody following it so far?
Yeah.
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 Sigma at point P1 or P2, the absolute value, point P1 or point P2. Now these will be the normal stresses, and just to make sure that we understand what we have been covering so far about the choice of coordinate axis. So if X is this axis, Y is this axis, and in the cross section, I will have Y is pointing upwards and Z is pointing this direction. What will be the direction of these stresses along the Y, Z, or X direction? What do you guys think the stresses will be acting along? So whether the bending stresses are going to act along the X axis, along the Y axis, or along the Z axis, what do you guys think?
X.
Yeah, we have been basically trying to go through this concept again and again, that the bending stresses will be along the x direction. So this will be along the x, there will be no y and z component, and the shear stresses are 0 because you have 0 shear forces at this length. There will be shear stresses between this point and this point. That means from here to here, there will be shear stresses in the material or in the axle. From point C to point D, there will be shear stresses, but between point B and C, there will be no shear stresses. Does everybody follow it so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So what was specifically different, or what is particularly different in this application, that this axle is not stationary. If it would have been a simply supported beam, as is the case shown here, then my point P1 will be under negative stresses always. Point P2 will be under positive stresses or tensile stresses always. But if I have this rotation, my axle is rotating, spinning. So if it is spinning, then what happens that after half of the revolution, what will happen that point P1 will now come here, point P2 will comes here after half revolution. So after half of the revolution, I have point P1 will basically comes down to this point, and point P2 will comes down to this point. But when this is spinning, it is not that the loads are basically changing their direction. The loads are still acting by the suspensions on the same location in the same direction. They are not changing their direction. They are not changing their location. So after half of the revolution of this rail axle, the loading scenario still remains the same. That means on the top, I will have negative stresses still because my loading direction remains the same. And on the bottom, I have tensile stresses. So what happens that this point P1, which was on this axle, that actually moves down to this location after half of the revolution. And by doing so, what it actually experiences, that it was feeling compressive stresses, and after half of revolution, it is feeling tensile stresses. Again, after half of revolution, this will move back to its original location. That means it will again become compressive. So point P1, if I track how does point P1 is feeling the stresses, it will be something like this. So it starts with negative, which is sigma P1 negative. It goes to sigma P1 positive. And you know what sigma P1 is. Sigma P1 positive. Sigma P1 is basically this value, 4 times bending moment, maximum bending moment divided by pi times RQ. R is the radius of the axle, where M is nothing but the bending moment, which is given by this bending moment diagram. So this bending moment diagram helps to find what is a bending moment. The bending moment helps to find what the stress is. And now from the stresses, we are trying to figure out what is the variation of the stresses over the period of time. So over, let's say this is n number of cycles, revolutions. So this is half of the revolution. And then it actually goes to this is full revolution. This is 1 cycle. So after going from from here to here in half cycle, and then again from positive to negative in another half, you actually see that this will continue doing so, because the railcar axle is not just spinning for only one rotation. It will keep on spinning as many number of times as required to move from point A to point B, distance from one place to another. So what you will find that the stresses in the material at a specific point, as you guys know from our discussion, that stresses are always and always described at one point in a material, not for the entire axle. When we talk about stresses are always and always located at one specific location. So if I track the variation of stresses at one specific location over the period of time, I will find that it will actually have this sinusoidal variation. If the rotation remains constant, that means the load remains constant, the angular velocity remains constant, then I will find that the stresses will have this periodic variation. And this variation, this cyclic loading or cyclic variation of stresses in a material at a specific location. When I talk about stresses, I need to say at a specific location. Otherwise, I cannot just say the stresses in a material. Cyclic variation of stresses in a material at a specific location is known as fatigue loading. So it is periodic variation of stresses or cyclic variation of stresses going from compressive, tensile, compressive, tensile, compressive, tensile. For every half revolution, you will keep on doing so. And that is what we call the material is being subjected to fatigue loading. It is being constantly subjected to tensile stresses, compressive stresses, tensile stresses, compressive stresses, and so on and so forth. And that is what we call as fatigue loading. And what was observed that when a material is subjected to fatigue loading, the strength of the material is determined by strength of a material is determined by a limit called as endurance limit of a material. Endurance limit. We will see what the endurance limit means. But so far, when we talk about the stresses, and you guys probably have learned so far that a stress strain diagram of a material goes like this for ductile materials. And this is your stress and this is strain plot. And you guys know what this point is called as, right? What is this point is known as?
Yield.
Yield limit. So this is sigma yield. And what this point is called as?
Like the breaking point.
Yeah, it is breaking point. It is also called as sigma ultimate tensile strength. Okay. So these are the stress limits. These are the two different, two limits of a material, two limits of stresses in a material for ductile, which have the ductile behavior, which exhibits ductile behavior. So we know about sigma yielding or the yield stresses or the ultimate breaking point. So most of the materials, if they are not showing any ductile behavior, then we don't talk about yield stresses. We talk about the breaking point or the ultimate tensile stress or the ultimate compressive stress. We talk about these stress, where the failure is happening. If the material is undergoing ductility or yielding, then what happens that we are talking about yield stresses. We are not talking about interested in the ultimate breaking point. We are only interested in the yield stresses. So this is the normal stress strain diagram that we have studied so far, and we have been using so far while discussing the failure of a materials. When you talk about Tresca criteria, von Mises criteria, Coulomb's theory, or maximum normal stress theory, or any other failure theories we have learned so far for static loading. But when we talk about fatigue, there is another stress limit that we have to be careful or we have to deal with, which we call as endurance limit. So what is endurance limit? We will actually learn that. Let me actually see some of the chat that is coming in the Windows. I thought that ultimate was the end was the fracture point. Yes, that's basically what you actually are correct, that this is the peak is the ultimate tensile strength and this is the failure point. But here, as I'm just showing you, I'm basically interested in showing you only the two stresses, and I'm just showing that the failure is happening right at the peak location. So I'm not distinguishing very different between what is the fracture point or what is the ultimate tensile strength. And to answer your query that the fracture point is different from the ultimate tensile strength, that only happens when you talk about engineering stress strain diagram, which we generally do. So in engineering stress strain diagram, you will find that after the peak, the stress value decreases or this curve decreases. But if you talk about true stress strain diagram, there is never a decrease. It basically keeps on increasing. The true stress strain diagram will actually have this will fail at this location. This is what we call as failure point or the ultimate failure point. So it depends on how you actually which curve you actually try to reference, whether it is engineering stress strain diagram or there is true stress strain diagram. So here it is generally for just discussion. I'm showing you that these are the only two limits of the stresses that we are concerned about as designers. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I was just wondering if it was like at the peak or
at the end, but I guess that makes sense when you say it like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean, please ask that. That helps me to actually clarify my points and will also help you guys to understand it better and appreciate it better.
Professor, quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Kind of going like back. I'm kind of going back up to the not to the very top, but I was like copying down and I missed. Why are you using like what do these circles represent? The ones that are going like clockwise?
This circle.
Yeah.
This is the cross section of this this axle. So the axle has a cross section, a circular cross section, and I'm zooming this cross section to this.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I just zoom this cross section a bit.
The rod, right? You're looking at the rod from the side?
Yeah, I'm looking at the rod from this side.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Okay, so I was talking about different types of failure limits. So when you as a designer would like to do some strength calculations, you will basically concerned about the breaking point, the ultimate failure point of a material for brittle materials, or you will be worried about the yield strength of a material if it is ductile, if it is showing ductile behavior. And if the component is being subjected to fatigue loading, then you have to basically be concerned about a failure point or failure limit, which we call as endurance limit. So what is endurance limit? So what has been observed that if I keep on applying this type of cyclic loading to a material and plot the failure stresses, so this is my stress, I will call as fatigue strength. That means the failure, that is the stresses at, fatigue strength is basically the value of the stresses at which the failure is taking place for a particular cycles of load. So this is a logarithmic of n. So this is 10, 0, 10, 1. So in x-axis is a logarithmic plot because my material can be subjected to millions of cycles. It is just not my rail car axle will fail in 1 revolution or 2 revolutions or 3 revolutions. It was going to spin 1 million times, 10 million times, 100 million times, maybe more. So we are talking about number of cycles, like this type of cyclic variation of stresses in a logarithmic plot. So that is why your x-axis has a logarithmic scale. So what has been observed so far, that if I plot the data about the failure of a material, a ductile material here for a simple steel, let's say SI grade steel, what has been observed that the failure of the material follows this, the data points actually follow a trend line like this. What these data points actually show that if I only subject a material to one cycle basically means I have this loading grips and I have this specimen. And I apply a specific load, a tensile load to this. And I just keep on applying the load. And then what happens, the materials gives me behavior like this, the sustain diagram goes like this, and then it actually breaks. And basically this is the point at which the material fails. So this is if the material is subjected to not only one, but half of the cycle of that variation, then this point is called as ultimate tensile strength. That is what we actually see. Sigma S is basically, the interchangeable variables here. Sigma is denoting stresses here, S denoting the stresses here as well. So if I am just applying one specific cycle of loading, then the material is going to fail at its maximum failure breaking point, which is given by ultimate tensile strength. However, if I apply 10 cycles of loading and unloading, I found that my same material will fail at a load value which is much, much less than the ultimate tensile strength. And if I keep on increasing the number of cycles, I observe that, let's say if I'm going through 1 million cycles, then at 1 million cycles, the failure point basically is given by this value. So the material will fail fail under the stress at which is much reduced than your ultimate tensile strength. And this is happening if the material is subjected to for example, pick a number here, let's say. So this is, let's say 100 megapascals. And this is 50 megapascals. So it is observed that if I apply 50 megapascals, but I'm subjecting my component to this type of cyclic loading and unloading for 1 million cycles, then my component will still fail under service. And that was the most puzzling phenomena at that time, when the fatigue concept was not very much well researched and well investigated. So people were not very sure that why a material is failing in service at 50 megapascals when it can break when it should withstand 100 megapascals. And then when people started investigating this phenomenon and dig more into that and try to plot the data points, the failure points for different number of cycles, they observed that this basically the data points follow a specific trend. And this trend actually bottoms or down, or basically it has a knee point, and this knee point is called or is known as endurance strength of a material. What this knee point tells me that after this endurance limit, if I keep on increasing my cycles, my material will last infinitely long. So it will not break at all after that. So if I apply, let's say 40 megapascals, then no matter how many number of cycles I subject my component to that, some component will never fail. But the moment I go from 40 megapascals to 50 megapascals, then it can only withstand 1 million cycles. If I go from 50 megapascals to, let's say 75 megapascals, then it can last only, let's say 1,000 cycles, 100 cycles. Are you guys seeing what I'm trying to say here?
Yeah.
Yes.
So this,
what is that?
yeah, go ahead.
Just like trying to read that S. What is the subscript for it on the top?
This one?
The one to the right of, yeah, that one.
Ultimate, ULT
Ultimate.
is the same as this, Sigma Ultimate.
Sigma Ultimate, okay.
So Sigma and S is basically the same. It denotes as stresses, and the subscripts represent the different conditions. So this is ultimate, this is ultimate. So I just take a very specific instance that if a material is subjected to 100 megapascals, then it can only withstand one cycle. It cannot withstand more than one cycle, because it is going to load and load and load. The moment it reaches 100 megapascals, it will snap. It will not last to see the reversal of loading afterwards. But if you subject it to 50 megapascals, then you can increase the load or increase the stress to 50 megapascals, then comes down to negative 50 megapascals, 50 megapascals, negative 50 megapascals. Keep on doing that, but you can keep on doing that till 1 million cycles, because after that it is going to snap. And if you decrease from 50 to 40 megapascals and you keep on doing 40, negative 40, 40, negative 40, 40, negative 40, you keep on doing that, no matter how long you would like to go, the material will never fail in service. So it will have infinite life. So the point at which this knee is occurring, this is called as endurance limit of a material. Does this concept make sense to everybody? So,
Professor, I have a question.
go ahead.
When you get near that amount of cycles when it's going to break, can you heat treat it to get it back to its original strength?
That's a good question, and there is no definite answer for that. The reason being that these data points are very stochastic in nature. I mean, there are a lot of uncertainties in the material breaking point. So let's say you are reaching 1 million cycles and you want to heat treat it and you want to release some of the stress.